There lay a woman, bleeding to death on the ground, with no one who wanted to touch her. Rain and, of course, blood pouring into the street. My mother kneeled down and tried to save her. Even when others told her that she had AIDS, that she was a crackhead, and not to touch her. So it was in the very early 90s. HIV/AIDS is still a very big issue. Then you have a lot of everything, people dying left and right in the 1980s, but even in the early 1990s. Remember Rock Hudson, of course, and Elizabeth Glacier. Those individuals that we've lost along the way. A doctor soon left his car to address the scene of the accident. There he met my mother, the only person who was trying to save this woman's life. Of course, she had just been hit by a car, and ambulances would soon arrive, and the woman struck by the car would later die at the hospital. But my mother, who did not become HIV positive for touching this woman and trying to save her, had shown such bravery, compassion, and love. This image, of course, replayed over and over and over again in my head on the drive home, as I knew that I was going to have to tell my mother that I tested HIV positive at 17 years old, just 2 days before Christmas. Never wanted to be caught off guard or indirect. My mother, mama bear that she is, she rushed up those stairs, and with, of course, Lynn and my stepfather, Robbie. She opened the door, and I could tell that she was visibly upset. She asked me what was wrong, and I could, of course, not muster the strength to even tell her. She then yelled at me to tell her what was wrong, so I took a deep breath, and I told her. I said, I tested positive for HIV. To this day, I can still picture the hurt on my mother's face and the heartbreak in her eyes. She fell to the ground and she began to cry. I just stood there. I didn't know what to do, but I just stood there. With Ashley, she held my hand, and Lynn and my stepfather, Robbie, watched my mother break down. My stepfather then looked at me and said, how could you do this to your mother? Lynn and Ashley, who looked as puzzled as I, of course, was at his response at the time, looked at me to tell me that it was going to be okay. Never wanted to be surprised, of course, by his lack of support or love. I was very shocked and I was very hurt that in this very personal moment that he, of course, had said that to me. My mother then excused herself. She locked herself into the bathroom and she began to cry uncontrollably. Lynn and Ashley had then left, and I was left all alone with my mother and stepfather, which was one of the scariest moments of my life. Robbie drove my mother and I to the Kansas City Health Department, where we would meet Joy Dugan, the nurse who would explain to my family that being HIV positive is no longer a death sentence, and that people can and do live full, healthy, happy, amazing, long lives. Today, they do, because of medication. My stepfather, of course, who was more inclined to talk about Magic Johnson on that pamphlet than his own stepson, had been a source of comfort and human reality to my mother. On the drive home, this is something I've never even told my mother. On the drive home, I sat in the back seat and I watched my mother's reflection through the rear view window. I watched, of course, as she wept for me. This was the moment that I personally learned what it was like to break someone's heart. My mother and I would spend Christmas together, and 2 days later with my family, who had not known of my diagnosis or the harsh reality that my mother and myself had just learned. 2 weeks later, my mother would take me back to the local Kansas City Health Department, where I was officially diagnosed HIV positive on January 7th, 2009. My mother had then gone ahead and she'd shared my diagnosis with the rest of my family, including my birth father and my brothers, who were in no way fazed by my diagnosis, or of course supportive. My brother Michael, who I'm sure we all have one of those people in our family, he just loves being the bearer of bad news. Really does. Love him though. But of course my brother Michael, who always loved being the bearer of bad news, decided to share with his friends, and they shared with their friends, and so on. So by the time that I got back to school after Christmas break, everyone in my school, of course, knew of my HIV diagnosis. Because also of a boy that, one of the 3 boys that I had been sexually active with, was a boy that was only a year ahead of me. This really hit home for my entire high school. It really did. I was a junior, he was a senior. We were in show choir together, always very, very competitive with each other. But we were in show choir together, and we were doing community theater together. And once he realized that he was out of the woods and that he was HIV negative, was the moment that he went and decided to tell anyone who would listen over Christmas break that I had tested positive for HIV. I have forgiven him. A lot of people ask me, but I have forgiven him, and he and I are friends. When I had gotten back to school after taking a few additional days past winter break for myself, because Lord knows that I needed it, I soon realized that everyone knew. People were looking at me differently in school. People were staring and people were whispering. In between lunch period and a dance class, my friends Kelsey Bantam and Rachel Coleman had come up to me and asked me if there was anything that I, of course, needed to tell them. I, of course, responded, no. And then they said, no, I don't believe you. Never, of course, to be fooled, Kelsey and Rachel engaged me further in conversation and told me that they had heard and overheard other members in choir and show choir talking about my HIV diagnosis. I was so angry. I was pissed. And I was so upset. I was so embarrassed. Above all, I was so humiliated. I was so humiliated. I was so many different emotions that I did not even have an opportune moment to even deal with my diagnosis myself without everyone else finding out about it as well. Of course, it's just like politics. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. There were others who asked to be moved away from me in different classes, as I was not someone that they wanted to sit next to or engage with, knowing that I was now HIV positive. I was so overwhelmed, and I felt so alone, that I began to break down on the inside. On the outside, of course, you would never know. I threw myself back into my studies. I finished up my junior year of high school with a 3.4 grade point average from a college preparatory high school, where it's kind of like charter schools. It's very, very harsh testing. You really have to do your homework to really pass these tests. Of course, that, and I was cast in a musical called Big River. I was Huckleberry Finn. At the University of Akron, I student-directed a production of Edgar Allan Poe's Spoon River anthology. Began to focus on what would catapult me into being productive and focused and successful. I became so focused, so much so that I actually exhausted myself that I had contracted mononucleosis. Talk about one bad thing happening after another. This resulted in more time off of school, more moments for me to focus on the reality of what had just happened. I would soon return to school and began a medication called a tripla, a cocktail medication of which I soon learned, of course, that I was deathly allergic to. I was, not only having hallucinations and slurring my words in front of teachers who thought that I was drunk, but falling down a flight of stairs in front of everyone else and getting very hurt, and breaking out in a rash that was awful. It was so itchy and covered my entire body from head to toe. The teachers became very worried about me, and they began to reach out in any and all ways possible. I'm so glad that this is actually here today and that we're able to have this meeting because of teachers. I credit teachers to, making sure that I always was able to, anytime that I've ever fallen down, to get myself back up and keep pushing forward. I love our teachers. They are the world. Many teachers became a source of comfort for me during this very difficult period of time, and they have guided me with such wisdom to stay as focused as possible, regardless of the side effects of this particular medication, which is very common for a lot of people, as a lot of HIV medications are very hard to get used to, and take some people weeks, if not months, if not an entire year, to go through these side effects just to get used to them so they can actually live long, full, healthy, happy lives. After a week of trying to regulate myself on a tripla, my mother and I had gone to the hospital, and I had soon realized that a tripla was not the right drug for me. Of course, seemed as if one bad thing after another had happened. I finished my junior year very successfully of high school, began my summer break. This time I didn't participate in any summer stock production, so I found that I had time on my hands. Now, I was warned when I was first told that I was HIV positive that it is very normal for a lot of people to self-destruct after they find out and have just a breakdown, become very sad, and act out in ways that they normally would not. So I found that I had time on my hands. I turned 18 years old. I was legally allowed to go out, so I went out and I partied for that entire summer. And growing up and being raised by a single mother, my mother and I had always gone through everything together. She and I had good times and bad, but one thing was very clear, that she loved me and I loved her. I moved in with my physically abusive father, who I hadn't really talked to since I was 8 years old, so it was just a very bad situation. It was very sad. And without my mother in my life, I began to self-destruct. Summer was almost over, and I soon would realize that I knew that if I wanted to get anywhere in life and pursue a career in public service one day, that I would have to wake up and put all of this behind me. I would tell my mother to come over and pick me up, and I began my senior year of high school there soon after, where I was extremely successful in everything that I pursued. I had auditioned for my first musical theater school in the second week of my senior year of high school. It was my dream college, and I was accepted on the spot. And I went and I graduated. Very proud of that. I was overjoyed. Finally, things were returning to normal. I was excelling in school again. I was accepted into my dream college, and I had, of course, my mother back in my life. I would finish my senior year of high school, graduate with honors as president of Drama Club, with an astounding 33 productions of musicals and plays under my belt, as well as being voted, and this is something that is always just fun to me, I was voted by my peers in high school most likely to be famous, and I was so offended when I got voted, and then when I won this one, I was voted and I won most opinionated. I still don't understand that, but clearly they saw some things that some other people tend to see. 2 weeks after graduating, I, of course, moved to New York City, where I would start my college career majoring in musical theater at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy. I finally began to live again. My dreams were coming true. I realized that everything that had happened to me had happened for a reason. Being raised Baptist for the first 19 years of my life, I never questioned God. I believe that everything happens for a reason, and that this was in God's plan for me, so I could help people and educate people. Although I might not have understood it at 17 years old, I of course do today. God blessed me with a gift, and my gift was HIV. God blessed me with an opportunity to, of course, help other people. I have always firmly believed that the Lord gives his toughest of battles to his strongest of soldiers. I never questioned the Lord or how I could be of use to the Lord according to his purpose. I knew that I was meant to have had the hardships that I have had in my early life to be able to help others not have to learn some of life's hardest lessons the way that I had to. But through all the ups and downs, one thing became immediately clear. In the process of actually listening, I found my own voice. Thank you all so much for being here today in this opportunity. Can you do some questions? I can do some questions if anyone has any. Go ahead.
Did you ever find the person that had given you HIV? And
I did.
Notified them?
I did. That man, like I said, it was only 3 people, so it was pretty easy to track down. Once the young man who was a year ahead of me in high school found out that he was HIV negative, then it was pretty easy to go in between the 2 other people. I had them both go and get tested. The one I actually had gone with, and he was HIV negative. So then I found out that upon the other young man's HIV test, he had called me crying. In January, and he had learned that he was HIV positive, which it's a shame, but I tell people all the time, I'm glad that he was able to at least find out that he was positive, because hopefully he will be safe and not infect anyone else. and vice versa with me. That's why it's so important for young people and anyone, even people over the age of 55, especially in the state of Florida, to go and get tested, because AIDS does not discriminate, and it's really important to test yourself, because in doing so you're being safe, and you're being safe with your sexual partners.
Well, did you, or are you aware that HIV started with one stewardess on a plane? Stewarder?
Well, there are a lot of different myths, I guess we could say, or conclusions that people have jumped to about how HIV has started. I've heard that one. I've heard that, you know.
Well, this goes way back.
Oh yeah, no, I know. There's oddly enough, there was a male flight attendant. There's one that I hear often, and he went over and supposedly he had sex with a monkey. And monkeys can
I don't think it was that.
But that's usually the one that I hear about associated with the flight attendant, is that man went over and he had sex with a monkey. And that monkeys do carry the HIV virus.
Yeah.
They do. And that he had done that, and that's how we had gotten that. To be honest with you, no one really knows where HIV has come from. If we did, don't you think that we would be a little bit even more further along than we are now in terms of actually combating HIV/AIDS in America and all around the world? I don't think anyone can really say. I wish I knew. I wish we all knew, because if we did know the origin of it, maybe we could stop it. But we don't really know that, unfortunately. So, any other questions? Go ahead.
How many people here have had a blood transfusion in the hospital since the early 80s?
That's right.
That was another very big issue.
And had their blood tested.
That's right.
Well, blood transfusions that's a major issue of concern. I cover all of this. Does anyone remember the name Ryan White?
Yes.
Little boy from Indiana who became HIV positive. He was an elementary school student. He was a little boy. He had his whole entire life ahead of him. This was in the early 1980s. He had gotten hurt while playing, and he, of course, had gotten a blood transfusion, and in that blood transfusion, he contracted HIV.
That's right.
Ryan went back to school after learning that he was HIV, and nobody would let him go. The school board, the superintendent, the principal, the teachers, he was not allowed to go to school. So his family had homeschooled him, and Ryan White, unfortunately, had passed away. But the wonderful legacy of that little boy, and doing so, and he actually became really a shining light for HIV/AIDS. We have various programs in this country. We have a very popular program called ADAP, which is the AIDS Drugs Assistance Program, which helps fund a lot of these prescription medications. Some of these prescription medications, the triple pill that I was talking about, that I had first taken when I was 17 years old, one pill once a day, which is very rare for someone who's HIV positive to only have to take one pill once a day. That's a blessing. That pill for 1 month script of a triplet is $1,900. One pill, 30 pills, $1,900. That's very significant. But you have Ryan White, and Ryan White, you have the Ryan White program, which it's amazing. It helps people who are lower income or unemployed or who do not have the resources necessary to pay for co-pays or doctor's appointments. You sign up in that program. They pay for all of your health insurance and your doctor's visits and anything that is related to your HIV care, whether it be a dentist or whether it be an optician, your eyes, any of that. So Ryan White lives on in my heart, especially because that was how I was able to actually get HIV medication when I was just, coming into being 18 years old. It was because of that little boy's story.
So Aaron, I want to thank you for coming and thank you
course.
for sharing your story with us. It's interesting to me that you've chosen to put your diagnosis out there for the public, and I think it's very courageous. Have you, in Largo, have you encountered people who just want to talk about your diagnosis, or are they able to change focus and actually talk about your candidacy? Because obviously HIV is a part of your story, but it's not your whole story. It's not who you are, it's a part of who you are. So are people able to look past that and talk about your candidacy and allow you to speak on other issues?
Well, it's interesting. It makes me very unique in a lot of ways. I do occasionally run into, I have to kind of chuckle to myself. sometimes I'll run into people and, I will, say I'm HIV positive, like later on in the speech, and as I'm looking out and seeing some people no one's done this here today that I've noticed, but as I'm saying that I'm HIV positive, people that I had met, coming in to giving a particular speech, I shake their hand, and then I see people like